So good morning, everybody. Welcome. Can I just commend you on choosing the best room at IDX, it has to be said. I've been really looking forward to this conversation because, as you know, it's all about derivatives technology, transformation in exchanges, and in clearing, complexity, operability, and software testing. And our thanks go to Exactpro for sponsoring this session, and particularly also to our panel for taking the time. The fact that they're all sitting around one table, I'm told, is a unique moment in time, so enjoy it. We will be coming to you for questions, so we look forward to hearing. You can ask the panel anything you like, I'm told, so I encourage you to do that. Just to introduce myself, if I may, for 2 seconds, my name is Julia Streets. I am the founder and the chief executive of my own business. I've had 30 years in the world of financial services, and I spent all my time working with organisations from the smallest fintechs to some of the largest organisations, all about transformation, change, innovation, and all the complexity that runs around that. I'm also a stand-up comedian, so I do get asked to host a lot of conferences and a lot of panels, so I hope that I'm going to bring some joy and some energy to the panel, but I suspect actually my job will be very easy today if early signs are any guide. Let me just tell you a little bit about each of our guests. To my left, I have Yann, known to many of you, I'm sure, who's the Chief Information Officer at the Tradition Group. He's been there since April 2010, responsible for group IT strategy, which is development, deployment, and support of current and new technology. Prior to that, he was responsible for the development, integration, and technological progress of the Turquoise trading platform, now, of course, owned by the LSEG Group. Before that, he was the CIO of the Boston Stock Exchange and has also had a tenure at the Toronto Stock Exchange. A round of applause for Yann. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Wow.
There we are. So to Yann's left is Anne Neidenbach, who is a global head of London Stock Exchange Group Technology and the CIO of the Shared Services business. She has teams in the UK, Italy, France, US, Sri Lanka, and Romania. I gather she's hot foot from here to Bucharest. And she's responsible for the technology products and services business, which is all about robust, scalable, high-performance technology, brokerage, exchanges, market data, risk management, surveillance, you name it, that all sits underneath her domain. Prior to that, Anne was Managing Director and CIO at Cowen Inc., and also has had tenures at BNY Convergex, Citi, and a couple of stints, I understand, at NASDAQ. Yes. So welcome, Anne. Thank you. And next on the line is Patrick Tessier, who is the former Chief Executive Officer at Minium, a Cinnober group company. While he was there for a number of years, the entire remit of technology sat underneath his guise, and his previous tenures before that, he was a Managing Director, Global Head of ETD Operations for EMEA, and that was at Citi. He also had a similar role at the UBS Investment Bank, where he was Head of ETD Operations for EMEA there. Global CEO of GL Trade, with a particular remit for Northern Europe, and he was the European Head of Listed Derivatives Operations at Credit Suisse, First Boston, at the turn of the century. So, Patrick, welcome.
Thank you.
And last but no means least is our testing specialist, Iosif Itkin, who is the co-CEO of Exactpro. He's the co-founder and co-CEO of Exactpro, a specialist firm focused on functional and non-functional testing for market infrastructures. It was founded in 2009 with merely 10 people on board and now employs over 550 specialists around the world. It was part of the Technology Services division of the London Stock Exchange Group, and in January 2018, the founders led and completed the management buyout from LSEG, the London Stock Exchange Group. Those of you who are interested, actually, I'm going to do your marketing for you, Iosif, allow me. This is really interesting. I thought it was just an IDX brochure, but actually there's a very interesting commentary here about trends in software testing. So anybody who's interested, do take one of those away. But Iosif, welcome. Thank you very much, and thanks for sponsoring. Very good. So I'm going to get straight to it because I chair a lot of panels about innovation, and I've kind of heard it all before. But what I'm always really fascinated by is the business rationale for change, and think about some of the initiatives that are actually in play at the moment and what you're thinking about. And understanding this stuff is deeply complex and very difficult to do. What are you focused on, and what are you most proud of? And Yann, I'm going to come to you first of all. What are you working on? Because you're to my left. You're to my left. It's a lazy way of chairing, but we're not going to just keep going that way, by the way.
Some time to think about it. No, so the things that we're doing at Tradition, you guys probably know what Tradition is. If you don't, I'll give you the 30 seconds. We are an interdealer broker, which means we're brokering between the sell side, a number of asset classes, I would say a lot of asset classes, in a lot of different regions, which makes my life a lot difficult. Because we don't trade an asset class in Singapore the way we're going to trade the same asset class in the US, for example. It's different culture. We need different tools, we need different applications, whether it's front office, whether it's back office, whether it's middle office. So the things that we are doing right now, Tradition, in 2000, we started to end of 2018 and 2019 is the strategy around the front office trading platforms that we need to support our desk, some of them globally, some of them regionally. And the problem is that every single desk can't afford to spend $4 million into a trading platform. Therefore, it makes it a little bit complicated because we're kind of a service within. We're sort of a software company within the group to be able to fulfill the needs of all those different desks. That's one part of the equation, from a pre-trade transparency, from looking at not at electronification of the business, but more making sure we can have an hybrid capabilities in all those desks. And the second aspect of it, which is also very important, specifically in our business, is the STP part. At the point of trade, whether the trade happens on a platform or happen into voice, is how we are making sure that we have the less human intervention possible between the point of trade to the delivery of the trade. I'm using the word delivery because not all of the products are cleared, and then we have a different way of delivery. So that's the point of focus.
And as you sit here in 2019...
And cost management, very important.
Yeah.
Always.
Right the way. Well, I was going to say, with a remit like that, presumably forever looking for efficiencies throughout. What are you particularly delivering this year, and what can we expect as we look into 2020?
I'm not going to go into the specifics unless the competitors
in
the
room.
I was really hoping
Is it a deep dark
So, but
it's all right,
we are delivering this year. We're focusing principally on the new generation of trading platforms for our desks. And we're also doing some proof of concept on a new STP, a new straight-through processing trade capture of systems.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you very much. And I'm sure that within that will be the questions about where that's hosted, how the data is, how the data flows sort of end to end throughout the life cycle processes, pre-trade and post-trade, and then also the extraction layers over that. And I know you're thinking a lot about cloud these days. Tell us a bit about what your focus is this year and what we can expect.
Sure. So I joined the exchange a year ago, and one of the compelling reasons why I did is because of our big Cloud First program, which we announced, I would say, last June. And for me personally, this will be my third time in this cloud journey. I had done it once at NASDAQ previously, and then also at Bank of New York ConvergeX. And I see this as just a big, exciting opportunity that we can do across the exchange group. So we're not just talking about data in our information services group, but we're talking about our trading systems, our co-location facilities, as well as our clearing houses and our technology business. So it's very diversified, and a big program that our board has sponsored. We're looking to put 60% of our workload up into the cloud using all the CSPs, so using the Googles, the AWSs, and the Azures. And it's a very exciting program. We are far along. We spent most of last year actually following the FCA guidelines in terms of doing RFPs, RFIs, selecting an integrator, making sure we did RFPs with each of the cloud service providers as per the guidelines. So we negotiated price and legal, everything legal that you have to do. And we, in earnest, at the very end of the year, started to build our minimum viable cloud, our operating model. And we have 40 workloads now up in the cloud as we speak. And we're well along that journey. So we've done the application assessments, the cloud viability. I'm very passionate about having a single operating model, a single set of tools, whether we operate on-prem, on Google, on AWS. So we've built that out, and we're starting to execute now, starting to move workload. So this will take us, obviously through the balance of this year and for the better part of next year. But it's a very exciting journey. Complementing that, I would say we're also building out a software-defined data center within our house, so to speak. So there's going to be a big focus on automation. And that automation is going to help us with resiliency, with reliability, and auditability. And those, I think, are the big side benefits. Everybody goes to cloud to save money. We actually focused on it for agility, but we get the side benefits, I think, of resiliency and auditability, which really helps from a resourcing perspective.
And one of the things we'll talk about when we sort of build on that is actually how easy it is to bring others into the cloud infrastructure. So, for example, some of the fintechs and some of the other sort of the functionality, if you like, the opportunity. Patrick, let me come to you. I mean, you're a minister without portfolio at the moment.
Absolutely.
So if I ask you what you're focused on at the moment, it could be sitting on a beach, I imagine.
Absolutely.
But let me talk to us about some of the initiatives you are particularly focused on and where you see the world going.
Thank you. For the last 2 years, my remit was to build up a new subsidiary, strategic diversification for the Cinnober Group, which was recently acquired by Nasdaq in January. The vision behind Minium was the fact that clearing houses and under the pressure from regulators over the last 5 years, 6 years, have invested in very expensive real-time technology, and they've got the upper hand on the banks and brokers. My previous tenure for 7 years at Citi, I couldn't help noticing that the regulators had increased expectations from banks and brokers, but the systems that everyone were using were dating from the 80s, and I'm being generous. So we had this vision of taking the know-how from the Cinnober Group, who themselves, like Nasdaq, are big providers of real-time risk and clearing technology to CCPs, and to make this available to the banks. We decided to go for a cloud-native solution. As it happens, cloud agnostic, but the first pilot client that we signed within 1 year was had a preference for Amazon, and I'm really pleased to say that it changes completely the way that people can address their processes. The cloud, and we'll talk about the benefits, but it suits a model of light, agile delivery to clients. The idea really is to bring into the capital markets the benefits that we see as consumers when we're using regular apps on our iPhones, having this agile delivery model, being scalable for a small broker or a large bank, not having to predict in any way or form the capacity that we need up front. And we also think that there's definitely a gap in the market where people today are very fragmented. And there's a lot of places where they've got data, but unless it's put into a store that can be exploited real time, this never becomes information. It's dead stuff. They can show it if they get asked, but it takes them probably weeks to get anything out of it. And it's not telling them anything necessary or useful for the next 15 minutes. It might tell them something about the last 15 years or 15 days. So really passionate about this leveraging on new technology.
Wonderful, great. And so Iosif, in response to all of that, and thinking about obviously your development roadmap and what you're particularly focused on, do you, Al was talking about the rigor and the resilience of the infrastructure on the cloud, etc. Are you focused on testing for cloud migration? Talk to us a bit about, kind of how you're responding to some of the trends that you've just heard.
Sure. So our development goes on site our clients. We build software to test software for our clients. When our clients start to deploy their complex systems in the cloud, we need to design methods to test them in the most appropriate ways. Most of our business is currently in mission critical system space like exchanges and clearing. So this year to support Minium, to support other clients, we developed extensions to our test tools that allow run non-functional testing in AWS using Kubernetes. So we are making sure that we are not just killing servers in normal enterprise deployment like we do for exchanges and clearing, but we also kill appropriate components, and also sometimes it is quite challenging to simulate outages in the cloud. Cloud to a degree is designed to be more resilient, and our task is to make things less resilient.
He likes to break things.
Yeah.
Well,
Smashing
we are
things.
not-
Before production. Not
we
after.
are not
Yes.
breaking things. We are showing that they were broken before we started.
You didn't know they were broken until you got in there. I love that.
I think
Yeah,
he's going to have
it's
problem with Jeff Bezos pretty soon if he's breaking Amazon, but that's a different story. Have to be careful.
brilliant.
From overall industry point of view, we see that larger and more innovative projects currently happen in post-trade area. We see more investment, some more work for us in post-trade area. Surprisingly, we started to look into some of our clients who are working on implementing DLT in their systems. So we expanded the same tools that we use to test clearinghouses to support additional plugins for DLT. And these projects are at the moment very small, but surprisingly they have higher visibility comparing to what we actually do in testing, but I remain blockchain skeptic.
Well, we're definitely going to come on to blockchain in 2 seconds.
Sure.
And I'm tempted to kind of pick it up just there. But before we do that, I'm really interested to hear, because everybody talks about the migration, the move to cloud. But these are large-scale transitions. These are large-scale projects. What surprised you about being relatively easy and straightforward to do? And what has surprised you about what's been more complex than you would have anticipated? And let me come to you first of all.
Sure. I mean, obviously, what I've seen, I guess, a couple of things. One, it's been much more embraced now, right? So the fact that I said board-sponsored cloud initiative, I mean, years ago when I was at NASDAQ, we had to, give our firstborn up to make sure that we weren't going to be losing, having security issues in the cloud. So I think there's a broad acceptance now that people understand that the cloud is safe, that we can put in the same controls in the cloud that we have in the data center. So I think we've crossed that bridge. I think we're now starting to see a tremendous amount of talent that can help us, but that talent is still difficult to get because of the broad acceptance. So we have an issue, I hear HSBC is hiring everybody under the sun, and that's actually made it hard for some of the niche integrators that I've worked with previously, because they can't compete from a compensation perspective. So I think there's a fierce fight for talent now, as you're starting to build out these capabilities. And I also want to applaud the regulators. So the FCA, I think, has been very, very good about putting together guidelines, accepting the journey, and I would say the same about the SEC. Now, my French friends, they are probably a little bit, they need to come along in the journey a little bit more.
You're one of the people in France, right?
ACPR. Yeah.
Oh, the ACPR, sorry, the regulators.
So that's been a bit more of a challenge to bring them along. So, for instance, we've been wanting to introduce more software-defined networks and firewalls, and as we're talking about our clearinghouse, I think they're a little bit more concerned. So, Patrick and I had an interesting exchange during the prep about how, in our program, I probably see clearing as one of the last groups to go to the cloud, just because of the risk and the regulatory concerns, and it's kind of ironic because I think you view it very differently, right?
Yeah, I think it's the area that is screaming to be brought into to the real-time world. There's no limit on the spending in the front office to offer real-time or pseudo-real-time even, whereas no one seems to be really fussed, including the regulators, about the books and records, the post-trade, the regulatory thresholds, the funding limits, the worst-case funding in the next 15 minutes. Again, all of this stuff, which is achievable in cloud technology and would be achievable under the old technology, but at a cost of multiple millions, and architectures that reach limits and get obsolete, etc. So I would expect the regulators to actually be on the front foot, pushing and shoving people to get onto these new technology. And if you think about it, FINRA was probably one of the first ones to come out and actually put due to the sheer volume, I think they were trying to do 500 billion validations on transaction reporting every day. So they had possibly little choice but to embrace new technology.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the governments had their cloud-first policies set out, maybe just marketing at the time, but some of them date back to 13 or 14.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So it's quite ironic to see that you're still struggling with some regulators to give you some.
And I think it's just
endorsement.
education and journey. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and conversely on the trading side, when you think of a low latency, you don't usually equate that to a cloud offering, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we are working really closely with each of the CSPs about how can we deliver a low latency solution. So we too are looking at next gen type of trading solutions, and then it steps into the co-location conversation, right? So not only do we have to have we want a low latency solution, but we need to have a fairness solution, right? So in our co-location now, we have cable, wiring, fiber that guarantees that, Yann can't trade faster than Patrick or Iosif, right? That, by distance. Yes, it's true.
You're lying to me.
It's true.
You've been lying to me all along.
Anyway,
I thought it was the fastest.
And so how do you implement that? If we put containers in the cloud, how do we guarantee that same fairness and access, right? And so these are sort of the technical challenges that we're liking to, to push people on. But
So yeah, I mean, your thoughts on obviously on the front office, but also on a global scale. I'd love to kind of what's been relatively easy to change, and actually what's been a lot harder.
So, of course, I have a different opinion than Anne, because I must have, and also
It's compulsory.
because I have
we've known each other for
because
more
I
than
have
10
because
years.
I have a different problematic to problem to resolve.
You always have problems.
I always have problems. Otherwise, why would they need me? Anyway, no, just kidding. Two things. Number one, I'm going to respond on the first question, because if I forget to mention that one of the very, very strategic initiatives we're doing in 2019 is also developing our market data offering.
Yes.
I will be killed by my
Head of market data.
head of market data as soon as I get back to the office. So that's done. Tick the box. Let's move on. The cloud is different for us because cost savings is one thing, but more importantly, we don't have to move the massive amount of data that they have to move in the exchange. So it has to be a very well-balanced approach to what do I put in the cloud. Sorry, what do I put in the external cloud versus what do I put in my internal clouds?
Right.
Because when you talk about cloud, you have to define what it means, what it is, and when you start to define it, you are going to realize, I've been running an internal cloud for the last 5 years. So all of those, it's also an education process when someone in the business comes to see you and says, we need to move to the cloud because I had dinner with the head of HSBC and they are moving everyone to the cloud and we have to move to the cloud. Hold on a minute. Let's define the problem. Let's put the right solution to the right problem. And I forgot your question.
Oh, just in terms of looking out around the world, we were talking about there are some jurisdictions, arguably, that are easier to navigate than others. Just your thoughts as you look out on a global remit.
Yeah. You're totally right. If you're looking at the regulators in Asia or the different regulators in the US, because there's not one but many of them, and you're looking at the regulators in Europe and the central regulator, because there's also one, then it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's more about governance. It's more about check and balances. It's more about policies and processes, rather than where you put your server, I think. But I agree also that the education process with the regulators, where not all of them, I'm going to try to be politically nice, at the forefront of technology innovation, it takes time.
Well, and to Patrick's point, the regulators that have embraced these new technologies seem to be on the policy side more open and providing guidance. So I do think it's just getting them to join you in the journey. And I know all the cloud providers are spending a ton of time with them and getting them more comfortable. So we understand.
But again, you don't want to put all your eggs in the same basket also, because we've ended up in 10 years with everything in the cloud and nothing more in premises. And you will have no more decent competition in the cloud. Then you're creating massive monopolies. That could be also a problem. So that's really the other part of the cloud is you need to know where your data is hosted.
Well,
because a lot of businesses, a lot of boards, a lot of companies do not want their business to be hosted in certain countries.
Right.
Right, yeah.
Because of the because of the geopolitical climate that we are living within right now.
Yeah.
So we also have to be careful. If you can't be guaranteed you're going to be hosted in not a friendly country, but a country where you own your data and it can't just be seized or leaked to a number of...
and the cloud providers are becoming more and more transparent about this.
Yeah.
Microsoft will publish, in fact, the number of requests, regulatory requests that they've had for publication of data, etc. And how many actually were successful or not. And certainly we have found that when we were working on our first implementation with Marex, we were able to chat with them where we thought we needed to put their data to make it resilient, and at the same time where they would be comfortable that they're meeting their obligations to the local regulators. In fact, Amazon specifically opened a few years back a domain in Singapore to meet the requirement from the local regulators that they were okay for cloud, but it needed to be in Singapore and accessible to them.
Yeah, I mean, one other thing that we're bumping into, so again, when I've done this before, I've done it with one provider, and now there's this conversation about data has gravity, and you're not going to want to, now we're having to look at profiling our apps, so we're not having tons of copies of the data on each of the providers, right? So following FCA guidelines, we want to make sure we don't have vendor lock-in, so we don't have everything in one provider, but now we've got to think through, and we're actually thinking of keeping data, to your point, on the edge, and just the compute up into the cloud. So there's actually design patterns and considerations that we're having to think through that are like, you don't think about that when you design apps. That's not normal.
And you have to take into consideration factors that you didn't do before when you were developing things for in-house deployments that have nothing to do with technology in your choices.
Can you give us a couple of examples of what sort of factors?
Well, I think I just mentioned one of them not that long ago without naming any one in particular.
Right, okay, yeah.
That basically, and the press is every day you learn about leakage of information from one of the big. Again, I'm not naming names, not even acronyms. Yeah.
But
they've been doing that forever.
But don't you have a great test provider that makes sure that you don't have those problems?
I do.
Right?
What's
He's
your
trying to
response
break
to
them.
this
He's
conversation?
the one ending up having problems, not us.
We are mostly working with the test data in the test systems, so it is less of an issue for us, but of course we are looking into checking that the data is not leaking anywhere. It's our top priority. But one additional important consideration to a degree is the cost of running testing services in the cloud. So we are trying to operate on a tighter budget on one hand. On the other hand, the software testing for complex systems is moving into defect mining area. It means that we have a complex system, we connect test harnesses around it and start running diverse data under load, subjecting the system to various intermittent problems like race conditions, small data inconsistencies that will not be obvious if we just run tests one by one. On one hand, it is highly beneficial from the point of view that you can uncover defects in the test environment instead of production under load with many clients. On the other hand, if we look at the bill from AWS that appears if we strongly stress the test environment with non-functional tests, it is quite heavy. So there is always a balance, and that's why we are still trying to do quite a lot of testing in enterprise mode using local test environments to decrease this component of the cost. But still, by the nature of preparing tools to be deployed in the cloud, by Dockerizing test tools, Dockerizing systems under test, it helps to streamline the processes not just for the cloud but for internal development and testing as well. So there is this benefit. even though there is a cost when it goes into non-functional testing.
Well, please.
No, I said I don't believe you can run a low latency system in a cloud at this stage.
Want to take a
That's-
bet?
I don't want to bet with you because I only bet when I sure I'm going to win.
Let's talk in a year.
But no, I said now. I'm
Yeah,
saying
right
that
now,
right now I don't think you can run a low latency system in a cloud in a competitive environment in which you have competitors that are basically trying to get market share from you in some asset classes.
Right.
Again, that's a lot of different conditions.
Right.
We're running our low latency system in physical premises right now, in physical machines. We have internal cloud where we run trading platforms and software into virtualized environments. You can call them cloud, internal cloud anyway. And we're running also trading platforms in external cloud. For example, in part of the world where basically we have less, not regulatory oversight, because there's still the audit and the policy that we have to have from a company standpoint, which is publicly traded, but in markets that are less regulated.
Yeah. So there are a couple of things that sort of come out there for me. One of them is around a question of cost, and then the other is actually there are three. There's cost. There is security, which has come up a couple of times, and then also the application of other technologies. For example, we were talking about DLT. We'll come on to DLT in a second and kind of opinions on that. But I'm just interested to know where the cost dynamic is shifting, because, as you say, when it comes down to testing, if the costs of testing are being squeezed and the margins and there's some relative changes around where do you invest more. Because in some areas the margins are wafer thin, and in other areas there is some room for manoeuvre. Have you seen your cost model shift as you've been making this transition as well?
Well, we're taking an approach to testing, which is a different approach, which is an approach tailored to what we need to test and for what reason. You are going to heavily test the systems that you expose to your customers. So the electronic trading platforms that requires API and connectivity, you need to test them from a functional and non-functional standpoint. One, because they're regulated, you have to offer fair access. Secondly, because you want the resiliency. So those ones are heavily tested. The platform that are basically either not going to create, if there is a customer outage, that customer outage doesn't impact either the revenue or the customer satisfaction, or as a lesser impact, then you can move to production, a software that has been untested. It depends what are your life cycles. It depends how often you do releases to production. There is a huge, big HFT company who is doing exactly that, who is basically doing testing on demand, and it says, okay, I'm going to test that heavily, but that one I'm not going to test because I can do 5 releases a day, and the releases are so small, then I can either fall back to the previous version, or if it breaks, I don't really care, because it's not going to impact my P&L.
And also from a provider's sort of standpoint, does that chime with kind of where you're looking at your sort of cost model and where your premium is and where the more commoditized services lie?
Oh yes, so I think we have a clear distinction with the mission critical systems where this testing is required, and some systems where the option can be to test it in production. So we are not really involved in the systems of the second time. So they are available.
I think there's a real skill difference. If you think of, and I've lived this, having to sometime modestly educate some of my colleagues from the core business of Cinnober that do large implementations on a one-time basis with clearinghouses or exchanges, that unless they've done a lot of M&A tend to have one system at a time doing one thing, not 25 versions. When you go into the commercial side, which is probably where Yann operates, and certainly the market that we were looking to serve at Minium, the old technology where you release the server or the software for the client to implement on servers, you could end up having like 25 different versions of the same server because you're not controlling the pace at which your clients are moving with you. When they're reporting issues, they may not have a test system that is actually relevant or connected to the version that had the issue in production. You may not have a fix in that version because they're running 10, 15 versions behind. And these are not sort of made up cases for an argument. These are actually the reality, especially in the post-trade world, where all these systems were implemented and maintained poorly in light of budget cuts and the financial crisis, etc. So immediately when you move to a software as a service, it's embedded that you have one resilience. You don't have to have a disaster recovery site. You don't have to have 2 production site failover, etc. You just diversify your risk inside the cloud, so you have multiple instances that can survive each other. That is a hidden cost that people don't really look at. I mean, in my career at certain banks, sometimes I was wishing we had an outage because actually the disaster recovery box was bigger and faster than the production one. And with testing, the ability to fire up a replicated environment in the cloud, it takes minutes. We were doing it in 15 minutes to hand over a test environment, mirror of the latest production version to these guys. All of which is this sort of hidden cost that people don't realize. But being able to quickly zoom in on the problem and have one critical version that is tested to death, that is actually technically lowering the cost of usage for the clients.
And that sort of chimes back to a comment that was made earlier about the importance of the agility point ultimately. But then obviously there's the tension between agility and security as well. And I'm really interested in when we think about
security but agility is when you don't fall, right?
Sorry, say it again?
I mean, security and agility is when you don't fall.
Right,
You're too agile.
Right, yeah. And as you look ahead, and also future-proofing and being fit for purpose.
I mean, having had the opportunity to work at exchanges as well as broker-dealers with algos and dark pools, it's definitely, to me, it comes down to risk and risk reward, right? And what's your risk profile? And obviously, the exchanges take risks much more seriously. I don't mean that in a bad way against banks, but if you have a dark pool, you may have DR, you may not. You don't have to. It's optional. Same with algos, right? It's there for a catastrophe, not if you're out for the day. If you're out for the day with a dark pool, people trade away, right? That you can't have that conversation at the exchange, any exchange,
specifically
right?
a primary
Right.
exchange.
Right, exactly. And for the open, the close for IPOs. So it's that. So we take that probably to a much higher degree in terms of risk and making sure that we're ready for that. So those are sort of the differences that I see in terms of that implementation and what kind of how we can handle that risk.
So I want to take a moment actually just to open up the questions to the floor. See if anybody on the floor has a question for the panel. Any thoughts particularly around cloud? Any thoughts at all from the crowd? In which case, don't worry, I have plenty more. One of the things I am really interested about, when I host a lot of panels like this, and I always ask the sort of heads of technology and particularly around infrastructure, is if in other industries, in other areas, if there's anything you particularly look at and think there's an application elsewhere we should be bringing in. And I say an application not in terms of a software application, I mean a trend, a technology, a model that you see in other industries where you go, actually, I think there's huge application for us here.
I know we are at the exchange, we're evaluating everything, right? So from distributed ledger to machine learning AI. I think, I would say
I can't believe how much money she has.
It comes at cost of budget again.
Jesus Christ.
But I would say we're looking at it. We're not, obviously ASX is much further along and some of the other clearinghouses, DLT.
Yeah.
But where I do see capabilities that people are really embracing is with machine learning and cyber, right? So if I look, we literally rolled out CrowdStrike over the weekend to over 5,000 endpoints. And part of using CrowdStrike is those machine learning capabilities to do our endpoint detection and alerting and possibly protection, right? And you see other companies like Darktrace that, actually churn through the data and not only detect it, but can help put in preventative measures like that. So I think that's super exciting because you're taking advantage of this explosion of data, a ridiculous amount of data that no human SOC, no human SIEM could possibly handle, and that you're leveraging that type of technology to do that alerting for you. And possibly, if you don't feel like there's a lot of false positives, actually shutting down that port or stopping whatever you fear that is coming in that could be catastrophic.
And Yann and Patrick, are there anything to add to that, and also in other sort of trends that you're seeing out in other industries?
It feels ironic to think of the the third revolution where the second one is not yet fully delivered. So the first, we were living. I certainly working in banks and brokers, we were living with one-dimensional technology. Going into the cloud adds a second dimension. Obviously being real time, having the ability to create data lakes that then give you this insight. So that's the predictive value, whether you call it AI or just the fact that you can actually, stress test what can happen in the next 15 minutes, not the last 15 years. The third one I would say is a curiosity, is effectively blockchain. Very curious to see what happens with the first real life rollout of a concept with ASX. I think it's still limited. There are some concerns about the performance, whether it can actually be as real time as more classic technology. Also the fact that it's another form of closed world, because if everyone chooses a blockchain but it's a different one, then you're not really solving the big challenge, especially talking to an audience of futures brokers and industry participants. The big cost is all these different implementation that you need to do, because everyone does the same thing with 25 different APIs. So I think the fourth dimension would be if effectively we can get a level of abstraction where instead of trying to replicate what every exchange or clearinghouse is doing, you can actually share the same components with them in the cloud. So when they compute for themselves, they compute for you. But that's probably, as I said, ironic to talk about the fourth evolution when the second one has not yet borne its fruits.
But are you planning for that eventuality? You're planning for that revolution?
My thing about these new technologies is we need to get them into the businesses and the product developers, right? So a lot of times we have tech to tech talks, and I'm not saying, trust me, I know technologists that know the business better than the business, right? I'm not saying that, but you need that business.
No,
but you need the business sponsorship that's going to think through the innovation, the opportunity, right? And so what I worry about, and ASX is doing a great job, I applaud them, but it is distributed ledger technology, right? They're a central authority. They are the centralized vertical. It's distributed about that, right? And I'm not saying that to be disparaging, but I think what is a distributed ledger solution? What do we need to do to build that to be disruptive? And when you are the center of the universe, which you are as an exchange or a clearinghouse, I think it's kind of harder to think out of the box like that. When you're a broker and you see you're trading across 50, hundreds of venues around the world, you're like, hey, I need help with reconciliation. I need help here. And I think there's probably more opportunities. But you need sort of the business people to help think through these challenges and how they can be disruptive.
I believe in the three technologies. I think DLT is at the level where internet was at the time, so there will be a long time where that technology reaches the maturity where we're going to know what to do with it, but it's there to stay. Too soon for us to get into it. We thought about it already because of the straight-through processing on cleared market, unclear market, etc., affirmation, confirmation. We decided not to embark into the journey, which will have been very costly and probably premature for us. I really believe in machine learning for effectively increasing our ability to be proactive in information security. Because right now, we are not. No one is proactive, we're reactive. We can spend 10 million, 50 million, or 1 million in information security, depending on our risk profile, but we're still reactive. So I think machine learning will help in doing that. Artificial intelligence also, on the internet law property, artificial intelligence can help, for example, doing price discovery. In a market that has very few liquidity, in a market that is not a central limit of the book, in asset classes where you're not going to move a lot of transactions, fragmented transactions, but big amounts of big amount in terms of transactional exchanges. So they are all the three of them are different. Surveillance also in terms of machine learning and artificial intelligence will help us improve the surveillance of our market going forward. It's not going to be in terms of how many people you have to survey your market, which was for a very long time, and still is, what the regulators are asking us to do. How many people do you have? That's not enough. You need 4 more. Well, hold on a minute. Artificial intelligence, the education process to the regulators will be part of our ability to improve our surveillance by adding to our staff the necessary tools they need.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, and somebody mentioned it about there's a whole bunch of data, and if you don't use it, it's dead, right?
Locked out syndrome.
And I think the challenge is there's still, even with the new tools, there's still foundational things that have to be done, right? I think there has to be agreement on taxonomy and syntax, right? Like, you have to define the data and agree on the data, right? I think you have a data quality issue. And I also just having, in my previous experience of trying to do TCA analysis, you still need time series. You still need to adjust for corporate actions. You have to do all of this sort of basic blocking and tackling. So you can have the coolest, you can use H2O or you can use Data Robot, but you still have to do sort of the foundational stuff. And I think people get caught up in the, the cool tool, the unstructured
technology fashion.
bit, but you actually do have to kind of go through those basics.
And what's the best way of getting some
structured.
standardization? Do you look to the industry to come together and, kind of, I just think about, a conference like this where we go, we need some standardization, some working groups around the taxonomy.
I mean, that's a big thing to say. We're trying to standardize within our group, right? And that's between the clearinghouse and the trading system, the trading, the cap markets, as well as the information services. So, I mean, that's just one company, right? So let alone the whole industry,
This is our biggest
right?
problem. If you look at what we do and what we trade and the asset classes, the market data standardization on an interest rate option is not the same one than on a equity derivative, and the taxonomy doesn't even exist sometimes.
Right.
If you're talking about the energy market, if you're talking about some product that they don't know what it means. So again, it's a headache. So it's not a standardization, it's the definition of what the data is about more than let's standardize the whole thing across the chain.
Well, I think the increasing pressure from regulators to get more data published and trying to identify the clients, etc., is de facto creating, I think, the momentum for people to sit back and say, hey, can we not all have a team of, insourced or outsourced, by the way? There are some companies that were formed just for the purpose of standardizing contract names for reporting. But, I think this is the kind of areas where the industry needs to look at. In the case of futures, you think of brokerage. How many years have we sat around tables saying, we should do something about brokerage and stuff? I mean, it's crying out loud for some kind of central repository and central marking.
Right, and we can't even get IDs. I mean, in the U.S. you have large trader ID, you have LEI, right? Like, and I don't even think we can even just get identifiers, right? Which even makes it challenging.
Well,
just securities, right? ISIN and
symbol. Asset classes where the same product has a different ISIN every day.
So I think it's great to have an industry standard. We aspire to. But I have no idea how we get there. I mean, it's constant. We haven't done it for years, right?
And you mentioned there about the role of vendors, and so let me bring you in there, Iosif, in terms of. I'm not saying you should be setting up the standardization at all for a second.
He's busy deploying Amazons.
I was going. He's got plenty else going on. But does this? I mean, from what you're hearing, is this not only what you're thinking about, but also give us some perspectives on other clients and the trends and other dynamics, bigger dynamics.
Okay. So on DLT, the difference between proof of concept and software testing is that with proof of concept you are trying to prove that something is okay. With software testing you are trying to prove that something is not okay. And what we see quite substantial demand in the first area when people are trying to prove that something is okay. And very, very limited demand so far in the second area when people are really thinking about taking the systems, putting them into production and trying to prove that something in them is not okay, to subject them to real software testing. That's why I believe that DLT across the industry is still in quite an early stage. When we will see that there is a sharp ramp up of the projects trying to prove that the systems do not work, we will say yes, it is. We are going into production soon. On machine learning, I agree that I believe it is substantially more transformational technology, and especially in software testing. So it is a concept of the conscience and learning So you learn more from pain rather than from pleasure or happiness. Say if you try to learn from pleasure, then there is a button you press and experience happiness. You will press this button again and again. On the pain, it is different. So when you experience pain, you try to avoid it and you start to look into different directions. And software testing is a complex, constant pain. So that's why.
Well, some people love pain, and someone who is pushing the same button multiple times and expecting a different result
And I know
is
how much pleasure you
either
take for the
a
pain.
madman or it's didn't understand the
He's
Pavlov
definitely a madman.
concept.
Yes, he loves that.
He loves it.
Yes, and say in production system, even when there are huge volumes of data, they still operate in a limited range of permutations that make their stakeholders and users happy. In software testing, it is necessary to go through more dimensions, and that's why I think there should be substantial breakthroughs in applying machine learning in software testing and also improving machine learning and artificial methods based on the insights collected through software testing.
I mean, one thing we're looking at leveraging in our LSEG tech business is really to take advantage of those technologies for our surveillance products, right? And as we look and we go out to the exchanges and clearinghouses as we're, risk management and all of that, again, going through all of that data, trying to bring intelligence into it and building a platform for quants, for people to be able to look at that data and leverage the data and build those algos. I think that we're starting to see much more of a trend as well.
Yeah.
So,
Well, let me take a pause there a second, and again, just come back to the audience. Just want to be sure that if anybody does have a question, you're very well. We've got one down here. Thank you very much. Microphone's coming to you. If you could just say your name and where you're from, and then it'll probably emerge after a while.
Is the mic on?
Keep talking, and it should. Sure.
My name's Mary Inman, and I'm a partner at a law firm here in London called Constantine Cannon.
I'm leaving now.
It's so interesting because you're all talking about the technology, and I think that's obviously appropriate given your backgrounds, but I represent whistleblowers, and so you can analyze all the data you want from the outside and have, artificial intelligence and everybody trolling the data, but it just takes one well-placed insider to tell you what you need to know in terms of security risks. So I guess my question to you is, what do you, I feel like whistleblowers are the original disruptors, right? So what do you do? We have a booth out here from the Commodity Future Trading Commission that has an office of the whistleblower that welcomes people to tell them about problems. I'm wondering, have you considered, are you losing the forest for the trees? Have you considered the human element as a confidential informant?
So,
how do you deal with that?
So it's really interesting that you bring that up, because I was actually at Citi in 2008 when the world came to an end, right?
Yes.
Right?
It was
we
you.
lost Lehman. No,
You're part of it.
and
remember.
at the time, if you were a sales trader, you thought you didn't have a job anymore. And then, thank God, 2008 came. Because you know what? People want to talk to humans when the market goes down 500 points every day. So there is, there's not a better robot than humans. Let's just say that, right? And again, I think there's innuendos. You pick up on human characteristics, on I have a feeling, all of these things, and we're a better robot. But I think there is so much data. It's a ridiculous amount. It's a fire hose of data every single day, that there's no way possible that as you're trying to protect your estate that you can possibly stay on top of that. So I think it's a combination of the human and the machine that really, brings out the best or brings out the worst in the company, is my opinion.
Yeah, I think what you heard on this panel today is a tremendous optimism for the power of this new technology. I think the first thing it can bring is transparency. If it can tell you something in within a minute that normally you would have had to wait for 6 months in arrears or maybe never actually find out, I think we are creating tools that empower the people they spend less time, pushing the paper, and they have more time to do analytics. In operations, certainly, when you look at old systems, people spend maybe 95% making sure everything gets into it, and then maybe 5% analyzing or responding to smart queries from clients. It's the reverse when you give them tools that they can spend 5% feeding the tool, 95% doing analytics. I think the whistleblowers and the public in general gets better served by this.
It's interesting in the voice broking business, for example. Some of the regulators.
I remember when you used to smash the phones.
Oh yeah, that was in Turkey. I remember that.
Breaking turrets.
Yeah, he was in Turkey. Oh my God.
The regulators, and specifically the US regulators, are basically wanting us to be able to take the voice, transform the voice into text, or transform the voice into something that we could apply surveillance patterns to it. We haven't found the right technology that will allow to us giving the difference in accent. You can see I'm French when I'm speaking, or the different. It's today impossible to do the proper way. So I think, again, the right way to do it is put as much as possible the process, the policies, trying to be as proactive as possible. And if you can't be proactive, and said it, to be as reactive as possible right after the fact. And sometimes you can't. You just cannot. That's not possible. So you just have to, not to assume the risk, but you have to understand them. And it also depends. If you have just a voice trading asset class, let's put it this way, not this, but asset class, it's one thing. If it's completely electronic, it's another thing. You can survey your own market. You can survey the person who is going to trade with you and trade with other people and do something dodgy, because that you can't survey in real time. So there is a minimum we need to have to do. There is a maximum we can do, and I think it really depends on the circumstances.
Does that answer your question? Thank you for that. Thank you very much indeed. So we are pretty much going to wrap it up, actually, because I know we have to get people back in time to the main room by 1:15. So I just want to just kind of just wrap up the conversation by saying it's been very rigorous. I've really enjoyed it in the sense that not only talking about, this is large-scale transformation, some of the considerations around that, both from a global perspective, an asset class perspective, pre-trade, post-trade, thinking about existing technologies and where they are in their maturity cycle, some of the complexities around data and surveillance and governance, and then also thinking obviously about the testing implications of that and where is the pleasure and where is the pain. I think I've enjoyed that more than anything else. But I'd say please join me in thanking the panel for a really, really rigorous conversation.